Authorities in Harris County, Texas, are investigating a shocking act of violence that unfolded outside a weekend house party, leaving a 17-year-old girl dead and an entire neighborhood shaken. The suspect, 20-year-old Eric Trevino, allegedly shot the teenager during an argument near the driveway and then immediately jumped into a pickup truck that ran over her as she lay wounded. Officials described the killing as intentional, targeted, and disturbingly violent. The first question that arises in examining a case like this is simple yet urgent. How does a social gathering meant for celebration devolve into such extreme violence? The answer is complex, layered in human behavior, social dynamics, and environmental factors. House parties among teens and young adults are often spaces of both excitement and volatility. When alcohol, peer pressure, personal grudges, and access to firearms intersect, the potential for tragedy escalates exponentially. But one must also ask, was this act purely impulsive, or did it reflect premeditation on the part of the suspect? Officials' description of the shooting as targeted suggests deliberate action rather than random aggression. Yet the line between planning and reactive violence can blur in emotionally charged confrontations. Understanding the circumstances requires a careful reconstruction of the night's events. Investigators reported that a verbal disagreement escalated near the driveway of the house hosting the party. What factors typically drive such escalations? Among young adults, research on youth violence indicates that perceived disrespect, personal rivalries, and the desire to assert dominance are common catalysts. Emotional intensity, amplified by substances such as alcohol or other intoxicants, often clouds judgment, reducing self-control and heightening the likelihood of physical aggression. In this instance, the argument quickly escalated to gunfire, a transition that is unfortunately consistent with patterns observed in many domestic or social shootings among young adults in the United States. Why did the suspect escalate the confrontation to lethal violence? While investigators have yet to publicly detail Trevino's motive, prior criminal records, behavioral patterns, and situational stressors provide potential context. At 20 years old, a suspect may have developed certain coping mechanisms for conflict that include aggression or intimidation. Coupled with access to firearms, these tendencies can create a lethal combination. The act of immediately driving over the victim after shooting her also indicates a level of disregard for life that underscores the violent nature of the offense. Was this a calculated move, a panic-driven decision, or an extension of aggressive intent? Each possibility carries implications for both criminal prosecution and the interpretation of youth violence risk factors. Another critical question is, how did law enforcement identify Trevino as the primary suspect? In cases of social shootings, investigators often rely on a combination of witness statements, forensic evidence, and digital data. Clothing or personal items left at the scene, spent shell casings, and ballistic matches can link a suspect to the firearm used. Video surveillance from nearby properties or vehicles may also provide visual confirmation. Witness testimony describing the sequence of events, including the suspect's actions and the pickup truck, helps create a timeline. The accumulation of these evidentiary strands eventually narrows the field of potential suspects, allowing authorities to focus on Trevino. What challenges do investigators face in cases like this? Social shootings involving young adults typically occur quickly, with chaotic circumstances and multiple people present, making accurate witness accounts difficult to obtain. Panic, fear of retaliation, and confusion contribute to inconsistent or incomplete reporting. Additionally, suspects who flee the scene or attempt to obscure their involvement introduce further complications. Despite these challenges, thorough investigative procedures, forensic science, and collaboration with the community often enable law enforcement to construct a coherent narrative and identify the responsible parties. Turning attention to the victim, a fundamental question emerges. Who was this young woman, and what is lost with her death. At 17, she was on the cusp of adulthood, with school, friendships, ambitions, and a future suddenly cut short. Her death is a personal tragedy for her family and a communal trauma for neighbors and peers who witnessed or learned of the event. Siblings and relatives often describe victims in human terms as loving, talented, and full of promise, emphasizing the irreplaceable nature of their lives. Each case like this also resonates as a social warning, highlighting the vulnerability of youth in environments where conflicts can escalate rapidly and access to firearms is prevalent. How does society contextualize such violent acts? One lens is through the study of youth, aggression, and risk behaviors. Adolescents and young adults often demonstrate higher impulsivity, lower risk assessment, and heightened susceptibility to peer influence. In the presence of a firearm, these psychological factors significantly increase the probability of severe injury or death. Moreover, social and cultural factors, neighborhood violence, norms, media portrayal of aggression, and prior exposure to criminal behavior compound these risks. Understanding these dynamics does not excuse criminal acts, but is critical for developing preventative strategies and interventions. Could this tragedy have been prevented? This question intersects with debates on gun control, youth supervision, community engagement, and mental health resources. Stricter access restrictions to firearms for young adults, combined with educational initiatives focused on conflict resolution, can reduce opportunities for lethal violence. Equally important are social support networks that identify escalating behaviors before they culminate in tragedy. In many communities, the absence of these safeguards allows tensions to build unchecked, often with irreversible outcomes. Why is the act described as intentional, targeted, and disturbingly violent? The combination of shooting and running over the victim suggests a deliberate decision to cause fatal harm. Intent in criminal law differentiates between negligent, reckless, and purposeful acts. Here, both the initial gunfire and the act of driving over the victim demonstrate a heightened degree of intentionality, strengthening prosecutorial arguments and influencing potential sentencing outcomes. It also highlights the severity of the behavioral escalation from argument to lethal action. What are the broader implications for the community? The incident creates a climate of fear, mistrust, and trauma. Witnesses and neighbors may experience anxiety, sleeplessness, or heightened vigilance, affecting social cohesion. Parents and guardians may feel compelled to monitor gatherings more strictly, while local authorities face pressure to ensure safety, enforce laws, and prevent further incidents. Schools, youth organizations, and social programs often respond, with educational campaigns emphasizing violence prevention, highlighting both immediate and long-term community impacts. How does this event fit into patterns of youth violence in the U.S.? Unfortunately, it mirrors a persistent trend in which domestic or social disputes among teens and young adults escalate to gun-related injuries or fatalities. Data from law enforcement and public health organizations indicate that access to firearms, coupled with adolescent impulsivity and social pressures, significantly increases the risk of lethal outcomes. Each new incident reinforces the need for systemic intervention, public awareness, and community resilience. What legal consequences will the suspect face? While formal charges depend on ongoing investigation, the described actions suggest multiple potential offenses: capital murder or first-degree murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and potentially vehicular homicide if the act of running over the victim is deemed intentional. Prosecutors will assess intent, premeditation, and aggravating circumstances, such as the combination of gunfire and vehicular assault, which may influence sentencing and eligibility for enhanced penalties. What is the role of mental health evaluation? In such cases, courts frequently consider psychological assessments to determine the suspect's cognitive and emotional state at the time of the crime. These evaluations provide insight into decision-making capacity, fills control and risk factors that may have contributed to the violent act. While they do not absolve criminal responsibility, they inform rehabilitation possibilities, sentencing, recommendations, and preventive measures for future risk management. How do families and communities navigate grief after such incidents? The impact of violent death extends beyond immediate relatives. Friends, classmates, and neighbors experience shock, anger, and mourning. Communities may organize vigils, memorials, or advocacy campaigns highlighting the human cost and demanding accountability. Social services, counselors, can support networks play critical roles in helping individuals cope with trauma and navigate the emotional aftermath. What lessons can policymakers and educators draw from this tragedy? Key insights include the importance of youth violence prevention, stricter gun access regulation, early intervention in conflict situations, and community engagement strategies. Programs that teach emotional regulation, de-escalation skills, and responsible decision-making have demonstrated efficacy in reducing youth-related violence. Additionally, law enforcement collaboration with schools, community centers, and local leaders can identify risk factors early and potentially avert escalation to lethal outcomes. Could social media or digital footprints influence investigation outcomes? In modern youth violence cases, digital communication often provides critical clues. Threats, confrontations, or coordination may appear on social platforms or messaging apps. Investigators frequently analyze these data to corroborate witness statements, track suspect movements, and establish timelines. Awareness of such evidence can also inform preventive strategies, as online disputes sometimes translate into real-world confrontations. Why does the case attract national attention? Beyond the immediate tragedy, the combination of youth, firearms, and deliberate targeted violence resonates with ongoing national debates about gun control, adolescent behavior, and community safety. Each case serves as both a human story and a reflection of systemic issues in American society, sparking discourse on policy, law enforcement, education, and social responsibility. In conclusion, what does this case reveal? The shooting of the 17-year-old girl in Harris County underscores the lethal intersection of youth conflict, accessible firearms, and impulsive decision-making. It exposes vulnerabilities in supervision, intervention, and community safeguards, while investigators work to bring the suspect to justice. Families, neighbors, and authorities are left to grapple with profound loss, societal reflection, and the urgent need to prevent similar tragedies. The unanswered questions, why it happened, how escalation occurred, and what could have prevented it, remain at the heart of public concern. Each facet of the case highlights the complexity of modern youth violence, the consequences of unchecked aggression, and the collective responsibility to safeguard vulnerable communities.